Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to explore volumes versus snapshots. So if we just go over to our EC2 section, and you can see the splash screen, we're just going to click on volumes and have a look at this volume. So this was the volume that was created when we created our EC2 instance. And the first thing I'm going to go and do is just set a name for this. I'm going to call this System Partition EC2. And the reason we do that you'll see a little bit later in the lecture, but it's just it's good best practice to name your volumes simply so that as you start adding more and more EC2 instances and more separate volumes, you'll be able to keep track of it all. So just have a quick look at this screen. So we've got our name of our volume, the volume ID, the size, the volume type. So at the moment this is GP2, which stands for General Purpose. And if you remember when we were creating our EC2 instance, we had magnetic storage, we had high IOPS, and then we also had general purpose SSD. So GP2 simply stands for general purpose. That's our snapshot ID. This is when it was created. That's what availability zone it is. That's the state. And we can go all the way across and you can see what monitoring is involved. So it's just the basic level of monitoring and whether or not it's encrypted, and it's not encrypted. So the next thing we're going to do is go in and just create a volume. So I'm going to make it 10 gigs in size, and the type I'm going to select magnetic storage. Now magnetic storage, you've got different options, but this might be good for something where you've got a file server, for example. You're storing flat files because it's a little bit cheaper and you don't require high disk I/O. So I'm going to leave everything else as the default. Here you notice that the IOPS has disappeared. If you were to click back on general SSD, it will give you an amount of IOPS or provisioned IOPS. It would say how much you want. So we're just going to go back and go to magnetic. And now I'm just going to go in and create this volume. Okay, so the volume is now being created, and I'm just going to switch over to my terminal window and we're going to just log into our EC2 instance. So I've logged in and I'm going to go to root user level, going to go clear. Okay, so I'm just going to Alt Tab back into the AWS console, and we can now see that this volume is available. And the first thing you'll notice, if we just have a look, we've got a 10 gig volume, and you can see the volume type that says standard, so we know that that's magnetic as opposed to general purpose. So the next thing we want to do is just attach this volume to our EC2 instance. So I'm going to click here, and you can see it will automatically display all our instances that are available. So I'm going to click Web Server 1, and this is basically where it's going to go, where the volume is going to be, where it's going to sit. So it's saying /dev/SDF. However, there's a warning message that's coming up saying newer Linux kernels may rename your devices to /dev/xvdf even when the device name entered here and shown in the details is something different. So, and that is going to be the case with our AWS AMI. So we'll just click attach. And what we'll do is we'll Alt Tab back into our EC2 instance. I'm going to run a command called lsblk, and basically this command is going to show us what volumes are available and what their mount points are. I'll quickly just go up here so you can see the arrow. So we've got XVDA. You can see this little connector button. It says XVDA1. The type is a partition, and its mount point is the root directory. So that's our system partition. This is the new one we've just attached, and you can tell that because it's 10 gigs in size, and at the moment it does not have a mount point. So the first thing we want to do, and this is a really good habit to get into, we want to check whether or not this volume has any data on it. Now of course we know that it doesn't because we've created it from raw storage, but this is a good habit just to get into, because if you're working a lot with volumes and snapshots, sometimes you'll be restoring snapshots to volumes and then you'll be trying to mount them, and we want to see whether or not it's got a file system, whether or not it's got data. So what we do is we type file -s, and we just type dev/xvdf. when it comes up with data, that means that it has no file system, it's just raw block storage. So the next thing we want to do is we want to mount a file system to this, or we want to basically format this volume into a file system, because right now it's raw storage. So in order to do that, we type in mkfs, so make file system. We then do the type, so -t is the switch, and then we want to say what the type is. Now the most common type for Linux is ext4 or extension 4, and then we'll just do the mount, or sorry, the volume location, so it's going to be xvdf. I hit enter, and now basically it's just formatting this and writing the extension 4 file system to this volume. If we were doing this in Windows, we'd obviously want it to be ntfs, for example, and I may do a Windows an optional lecture just showing you the same thing, how to do this in a Windows environment later on. Okay, so we finished writing our file system to our volume. What we want to do now is we're going to create a directory. So we're going to go make directory, we're just going to call this file server. And now what we want to do is mount this volume to our file server. So we're going to say mount, and then the volume location, so it's dev xvdf to file server. And there we go. So if we go into our file server now, you can see that it's empty apart from the lost and found directory, and that's basically whenever you add a new volume, that's created by default. So I'm just going to remove that. Okay, so it's empty, and now we're going to go in and we're going to create a couple of new files. So let's go nano, and we'll just type in hello world.txt. And I'm going to type hello world, and then I'm just hitting Control X to exit, and it's going to ask me if I want to save, and I'm going to go yes, and then hit enter. Also just going to create a basic HTML file, so called nano index.html. I'm going to say we'll keep it something separate, so we'll just say this is my web page. Then Control X, and it's asking me if I want to save, and I hit yes and hit enter. And now if we go ls, you can see the two new files that we've created. Now we're going to come out of this directory and we're going to unmount the volume, and to unmount we basically go umount dev xvdf. And now it's unmounted the volume, and if we go back into our file server directory and type ls, you can see that there's no files there now. So we've successfully unmounted that volume. So we'll just switch back to the console, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to detach the volume. This might take a couple of seconds. Almost there. Might just pause the video to keep you from waiting, so just hang on a second. Okay, and now we can see that the state has changed from in use to being available. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a snapshot of this volume. I'm going to call it my file server, and I'm going to, as the description, I'm just going to call it a snapshot of my file server. I'm going to hit create, and hit close, and we go into snapshots. We'll see that that's pending, and again I'm just going to pause the video and wait till that's a live snapshot. Okay, now we can see the status is completed, we can see the size of the snapshot, and just to keep things interesting I'm going to go back into my volume section and I'm going to delete this volume. Just so you can see that we're going to that we'll be able to take the snapshot and create a new volume for it. So you go back to snapshots. The status has actually changed to pending, and that's just because we've deleted the original volume. So I'm just going to wait for a second. I have to pause the video again, apologies for this. Okay, now you can see it's completed, and what we're going to do now, we just go back into volumes. You can see there's only one volume in there. We're going to take this snapshot and we're going to create a new volume. So hit create volume. And what's interesting now is that the type, you can change the type. So before we were on magnetic, and now we want general purpose SSD. So this is a really cool feature, and if you think about it, if you're building like a test and dev environment, you can build out your entire environment on magnetic storage, and it's going to cost you less money than doing SSD. And when you're ready to go live, you can basically take a snapshot of that volume and then delete the original volume and then create a new volume on a different storage medium. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So I'm going to hit create, and it's incredibly quick to create a new volume from a snapshot as opposed to creating an entirely new volume. You can see it's already been created here. So I can go back to my volumes. You can see our new volume. You can see the volume type has changed to general purpose SSD storage. So now, if we just go back into our terminal window, clear the screen, and type lsblk, you can see there's only one volume currently. So I'm going to go in and attach this volume. I'm going to select my instance, that's my web server, and hit attach. Now I'm going to go back to my terminal window. If I type lsblk again, yep, there we go. We can see the newly attached volume. You can see that it's 10 gigs in size, and we can see that it doesn't have a mount point. So I mentioned earlier about running a file -s dev xvda, xvdf it should be actually, and you can see there now that it's not saying data, which effectively means that this already has a file system written to it. So what we don't want to do is create a new file system over that, because it's going to delete all our data off that volume. So we'll go to our file server directory, check that it's still empty, and now what we're going to do is we're going to mount our xvdf volume to our file server directory. Now if we go into file server and type ls, and there we go, we can see our files from where we took a snapshot. Okay, and that concludes this lecture. I hope it's been useful to you. Just a couple of things you should take away from this lecture. We've learned the difference between volumes and snapshots, where a volume can be a raw, unformatted disk, or a volume could contain information on it if restored from a previous snapshot. And a snapshot itself is just simply, as it says on the tin, it's a point-in-time shot of a volume. So that's the difference between volumes and snapshots. The other thing we've learned is that we can start with magnetic storage and then take a snapshot and restore that information to SSD storage. And that is an exam question that will come up, so just do remember that. There is a way to move your data from magnetic storage onto SSD storage using volumes and snapshots. And that's it. And in terms of a practical example where you would use this in the real world, you might want to use your test and development environment on magnetic storage because it's cheaper, and then when you're ready to go into production you might want to restore a snapshot to a new volume with provisioned IOPS or high IOPS. So that would be a real world example where you would do that process. Okay, so in the next lecture we're going to explore Amazon machine images and how we can create an AMI and then share it with the community, and also what security considerations we should take when doing so. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.